The potential transition of Xbox away from dedicated consoles to a more PC hybrid approach makes me wonder about the low-level APIs / optimization that define console video games. Is low-level, quote-unquote, coding to the silicon already sort of dead in the new age of multi-platform games, barring some first-party Switch games? Interesting question, right, John? What do you think?
So from what I understand, while this like low level coding is not like the most common way, there is still some of this stuff being done these days, for specific things, right? I can't think of the examples off the top of my head, but I actually spoke with a developer not that long ago that was doing some kind of like super low level stuff, for parts of the engine and parts of the game, just to get certain things to be extra fast, right? And also, if you look at what id Software did with Doom: The Dark Ages, right? And you actually can, like, they're so specific about the way they handle, like, memory reads and writes and the location in memory. And they're kind of, like, taking a lot of that approach, right? Where they're very much paying close attention to, like, where things sit when they actually go into RAM. And so that they minimize the latency when you need to read and write between different locations, right? So, like, it's that same kind of, like, low-level design that you often hear people talk about when they talk about optimization, is paying attention to the nitty gritty to massively increase performance where it needs to be. And I think that's kind of the big thing, and it is still around these days, even if it's not like the norm necessarily, right?
I think there's just a general advantage to just having to develop for one platform.
Sure.
That, it just makes development a lot more streamlined. And I guess, the sort of ultimate example of that is, if we go back to the classic example, The Last of Us Part 1, the PC port of that, using equivalent level hardware on the PCs based to what's happening within the PlayStation 5, there's a huge gulf in performance. And I think a lot of that is down to the fact that a lot of to make the game work on more PCs, they stripped out a lot of the asynchronous compute stuff that was built specifically for the PlayStation 5. Might be wrong on that, but it would explain why there's this yawning performance chasm. Oliver, any thoughts on this one?
Yeah, I'd kind of think more about the things that make each platform unique, because there are a lot of exclusive Switch and PS5 games still, and we do see issues porting, in particular with these Nixies ports, porting PS5 games to PC, in some cases PS4 games to PC. In some cases, perhaps that's issues with async compute, perhaps that's issues not having hardware decompression, perhaps that's issues with just dealing with a non-unified pool of memory in a game like Ghost of Tsushima, right? So like, these aren't necessarily things that require like super to the metal coding, but these are elements of those systems that don't necessarily translate onto other platforms very well, and do take advantage of the discrete elements of these systems that make them unique, that can make them unique. So in the Xbox side of things, perhaps that's going away. Perhaps it was not really as much there to begin with in the first place. But I think people will continue to do interesting stuff with these fixed hardware platforms that do have unique features. And I think we see that on Switch 2 and PlayStation 5 at the moment.
Yeah, there's also elements of a game that are difficult to translate. I'm just thinking to the variable rate shading solution that was developed by Infinity Ward for Call of Duty, which certainly in its early days, I haven't really kept up with it, to be honest, but certainly in its early days, it was kind of using the MSAA hardware within the GPU to do crazy things that it was never designed for. And I think they probably could have maybe done that on Radeon cards for PC, but it would have been a problem for NVIDIA, so it just didn't happen there. But that was going back to like the original reboot of Modern Warfare 2019. Certainly an interesting thing, though, and I do think, you pointed out in your Death Stranding 2 review, John, that it was, a game built for PlayStation, right?
Yeah, exactly. Very much. And obviously, if Death Stranding 1 is any indication, we will get a PC version, probably other platforms eventually. But their approach is kind of interesting, where they're basically rolling out one after the other, right? They're not doing a bunch of versions at once. It's like each version gets its own dedicated development time.
Yeah. And the Xbox version, in fact, which, kind of conclusively proved that Decima does and indeed can run rather well on alien hardware, so to speak.
Indeed.
which actually isn't that alien.
No.
If you think about it, still much the same thing.